Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
Today is the last in a series of 3 sermons on homelessness. 2 weeks ago, Deacon Sonia talked about the way local businesses encounter the homeless here in Fair Oaks. 1 week ago, Father Rick Rasmussen talked about Lazarus at the Fair Oaks gate in the embodiment of a homeless person. Today, I close this series of 3 sermons concurrent with our celebration of the Feast of St. Francis. It is my desire in this final sermon to offer all of us hope and also answer the questions some of you may have, like I do. How can St. Francis Church make a difference? On this feast, we celebrate St. Francis and his care for the dignity of our Fair Oaks chickens and dogs and cats and other things. And I would suggest we seek to follow the saint's prophetic call and to lead to our care of human beings who also ache for dignity through safe shelter and food. In one of Franco Zeffirelli's films, Francis, he shows how Francis removes all of his clothes to emphasize taking off the life of privilege and putting on the life of Christ. Don't worry, we are not going to take Francis literally. I'm not going to take off my clothes, nor am I asking you to do that. In fact, the title of my sermon today is Naked Like St. Francis, or Dressed for Prophetic Success. So we're going to keep our clothes on. I'm sure you're relieved. The bishop who was listening to Francis took off his robe and gave it to Francis, insisting that Francis might be covered up. He took off his clothes in this town square. The bishop was there. Francis was trying to make a point to him about caring for the poor, ripped off his clothes, standing there naked, and the bishop's response was to give him his own cloak and to put it on to Francis. Francis was ticked off, to say the least, because the bishop did not get the point. There stood Francis naked, after he gave that second robe, the bishop's robe, to the beggar next to him. Apparently, the bishop understood just a little bit more of what Francis had in mind. But Francis's bishop is not the only dense one that I want to talk to you about this morning. I want to share a little bit about my own life that you don't know yet, after 4 years. I grew up to expect that when we work hard, we earn the benefits of privilege. I also learned that when we lack privilege, it must mean that we did not work hard enough to earn privilege. I grew up believing, I grew up in the Bronx, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. Not out in suburbia, not in the country, not in a rural area, in the heart of the city. Working class poor, but not really poor. My dad had a job, we all had food at the table, and we tended to give money to the poor. In the Roman Catholic Church of those days, my parish church, as you walked into the Roman Catholic Church, to the side, there was a little holy water fountain, a little cup of holy water, and then up from it was a cross, and there was a little hole in the cross that you could put your coins into. And so we called it the poor box. We gave to the poor. But I grew up, in addition to that spiritual practice, I grew up believing the poor were dirty and untouchable, so I stayed away from the poor. I grew up thinking also that where the poor congregate and live, there are security issues and a great likelihood of a lack of personal safety. As much as my parents endeared in me and grew in me love, they also gave me the gift of fear. I walked down carefully streets in New York City, avoiding certain streets, avoiding certain neighborhoods, and in the course of a lifetime, building up a life of fear. In many ways, these childhood beliefs have shaped the priest I am today. So here's a little something that you may not know about the selection of priests by parishes. And this is not written in a rule book anywhere. And it's unlikely that Ken and Britt told you this 5 years ago. And it's unlikely that Ken and Andrea shared it with the search committee. Parishes call, you probably know this first part, you won't know the second part. Parishes call priests to be their priest in charge or rector when they share a common vision for the future. That part you know. And 5 years ago, your vestry called me to be priest in charge because I shared the search committee's passion to become financially stable and to get this parish back on its ministerial feet. You can decide whether we've been successful. I think we have. Here's the part you may not know. Parishes also unconsciously call priests who share the congregation's anxieties, discomforts, and fears. We, you, and I have equal responsibility in this choice. The words you hear are not about blame, but rather an equal share of responsibility. And one of this parish's anxieties is security from and discomfort with homeless. And you don't stand alone. I've done a little bit of work now looking at other parishes here in Fair Oaks and beyond, and there's a general discomfort. Deacon Sonia talked about the local businesses. We're not alone. It's not just the church, it's many of these other entities that surround us. Indeed, it's all of Fair Oaks. Our general stance as a parish is not much different than the place that we live in. If the Fair Oaks business owners are anxious about and uncomfortable with the homeless, and the town is organized on economic lines of affluence and poverty, as Deacon Sonia shared with us, then we're not likely to be different. Unless, of course, a church like St. Francis were to become a visible and prophetic leader of change like Francis was before his bishop. Again, we're not taking off our clothes, so stay with me. Last Sunday, I went to St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Walnut Creek with Stephanie and her mom. It was a momentous day because it was the first time in 6 months that Stephanie went to church. And it was a momentous day in the life of the Diocese of California because Stephanie was asked by Bishop Mark Andrus, the Bishop of the Diocese of California, to represent him. On any particular Sunday, the bishop and the canon, when she was well, would spend Sunday going to various congregations throughout the diocese. And Stephanie hasn't been able to do that for 6 months. And on her birthday weekend, part of Bishop Mark's gift to her was to invite her back into the life of service for one day, one morning, 1 hour. Stephanie had the privilege to read the proclamation written by the bishop and the canon to give testimony and to recognize the life of the rector who had been there for 10 years. That woman's name is Sylvia Vasquez. Walnut Creek, like Fair Oaks, is economically diverse, with the affluent, the middle class, and the very economically disadvantaged. On the night before Sunday morning, on Saturday, in the parish hall, there was a huge party for Sylvia Vasquez. The entire parish showed up. Much carousing, much good food, much wine flowing, many conversations, some gifts. And in the course of the evening, Sylvia Vasquez was asked to speak. And she spoke about a whole bunch of things. I wasn't there, but I heard about it. And it was like 11 o'clock at night when she was giving her final words. And she said, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't have a sermon for tomorrow morning." And then the next morning she arrives. And she said she had a hard time with the gospel because for over 10 years she had come to know St. Paul's Church in Walnut Creek as a parish that had never left Lazarus invisible at their church's gate. So here was a gospel talking about Lazarus at the gate being passed by the rich man. And Sylvia was like, what am I going to say? I can't challenge my parish. My parish has done this work for 10 years. The people of St. Paul's Church not only gave money, but they also gave bread, and they used their privilege, power, and influence in the city's chambers to begin to change local systems and practices that otherwise would continue to systematically ignore Lazarus at the city's gate. In many ways, St. Francis is just like St. Paul's. I concocted my whole sermon Sunday morning in Walnut Creek. I know what I'm going to say next Sunday morning for the Feast of St. Francis. St. Paul's shares their campus space with 2 other churches. We do it because we need money. They do it because their core value, like our core value, is that this place should be a center for all faiths. So we're like them and we're not like them. They share with a Greek Orthodox church who meets on Sundays at 11:30 a.m., an evangelical church with contemporary music at 2:30. Like St. Francis, St. Paul's has a huge piece of property. We're small compared to them. They have a large parking lot like us, but they also have vast land beyond their church, beyond their parish hall, beyond some offices. Over the last decade, the people of St. Paul's have been working to find ways to address the lack of affordable housing in Walnut Creek. Very soon, St. Paul's will take a portion of their ground and build affordable housing. Other Walnut Creek parishes are beginning to think about the ways they use their property in a similar manner. St. Paul's has exercised leadership in the city of Walnut Creek to bring about change. Due to the influence of Episcopalians like you and me, in the future, Walnut Creek will be a more compassionate city than it was in the past. Even Walnut Creek's local leaders are changing their decisions and the use of the city's budget due to the influence of the people of St. Paul's. St. Francis is poised to lead similar change in Fair Oaks. Last year, more than a quarter of this parish generously gave time one evening to prepare and serve a meal for Sacramento's homeless through the Winter Sanctuary program at St. Matthew's. This was a major step forward for us. We moved forward from not only giving our money, which we do so generously, we showed up and we cared for the most needy among us. We are very familiar with how to do outreach when we give money and gift our time to cook a meal. There is one other form of outreach that gets talked about in a handful of congregations in the Episcopal Church. In addition to the gift of our time and money, we can also share our privilege and our power to influence change. I'm sure you, growing up in the Episcopal Church, have heard these three words: time, talent, and treasure. Money is one form of treasure. Our privilege and our power and our influence is also our treasure. Growing up, my dad in New York City, we had a night mayor. There was a night mayor. You could call up the night mayor and complain about something. My dad was a great complainer. And he memorized that telephone number of the night mayor. And he was a chronic complainer. And he would always tell us, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so if the street light was out on the street that we lived on, he called the night mayor. And the night mayor knew him by name. Do our local council people know us by name? And do they know us for our complaints? Do we complain for ourselves, for our own benefit, or for the benefit of others? When Francis took off his clothes, he was taking off his privilege. He was taking off the clothes of wealth to enrobe the poor beggar next to him. On this feast of St. Francis, I want to invite us to use our privilege and power, even our best clothes, to influence the way we encounter the homeless in Fair Oaks. We can't make this journey alone. It's a challenging, arduous journey. This past week, I had a wonderful conversation with Pastor Bryant. And without it being on my agenda, Pastor Bryant has a working vision about the way we and our two congregations together might begin to more compassionately encounter local homeless. Pastor Bryant is committed as we are to campus security, and the truth be told, more so. I have come to learn through my work with Pastor Bryant and my work with another African-American pastor in Reno, that African-American pastors and African-American congregations, because of the way they've been treated, have a number one care and concern about security for their own personal safety. You may not know this, but every Sunday, as Valley Redemptive gathers in this church, Pastor Bryant has 2 members of the church patrolling the area. One of their ministries is security. And every time Valley Redemptive meets on this campus, there are 2 people out on the grounds making sure their people are safe. Pastor Bryant wants to see if together we can turn a corner in the way we've encountered our local homeless. So there'll be a lot of baby steps before we have any significant impact. I have no false aspiration that we will be St. Paul's Walnut Creek overnight. Today, the vestry will hear one shared idea that Pastor Bryant proposed last week. Some additional things we might do together is to begin to talk about the way the St. Francis Church Center becomes a place of tangible hope for all people, especially for Lazarus at St. Francis Gate and the other Fair Oaks gates. How might all who come to this campus taste our abundant hope and have a foretaste of heaven where nobody goes away empty-handed? There are no easy answers to this question. We will not have a solution in the next hour or even the next few months or even before Deacon Sonia is ordained to the priesthood. It's not as simple as informing ourselves about local services so that when those in need come to us, we can send them in life-giving directions to satisfy their need for housing or a shower or meals, because there are no local services in Fair Oaks. Fair Oaks churches have historically ignored the homeless problem. Some of our church neighbors, like New Community Life down the street, go downtown to feed the homeless. But what about the homeless across the street? Who feeds them? St. Francis has an opportunity to lead change by bringing people and other churches together to address the needs of homeless persons in Fair Oaks. We cannot be named the Church of St. Francis and stand by without trying to do something to lead change in our Fair Oaks neighborhood in the same ways that St. Francis would have. The average age of this congregation is somewhere about 75 and above. So unlike St. Paul's Walnut Creek, we're not likely to build affordable housing, nor do we have the space for it. We're not going to turn our church into a shelter, but we can. We can, in very comfortable, not ways that are too stressful, use our privilege and our power to influence change in our Fair Oaks neighborhood in ways that benefit the homeless and also this congregation. Not only must we keep our clothes on, we must wear our best clothes to influence change that benefits those with few clothes. So let us stand up well-dressed before the city, town, and Fair Oaks village councils and begin to ask questions from a place of compassion and not fear. In closing, in 1988, way back in 1988, John Malloy, does that name ring a bell to some of the business people here? John Malloy wrote the best-selling book, Dress for Success. It became part of the language of America, dressed for success. Let us dress for prophetic success and begin the journey towards compassionate change that sets St. Francis Church apart from its other church neighbors as a place of abundant hope for all. In Francis's name, we can do this if we courageously and compassionately use our privilege. God bless you, and happy St. Francis Day.